Welcome to Parenting the Gap, Episode 1. Today, you're going to learn all about who I am and what I'm planning to bring with this podcast, so stay tuned. Hello, welcome to the very first episode of Parenting the Gap. My name is Jennifer Butler, and I'm a certified youth life coach who specializes in working with youth, young adults, parents, and individuals who are just working through life's transitions, like how we all are all the time. So I want to be 100% honest with you guys. I've been trying to record this episode now for a week, maybe a little bit more. Maybe it's been 2 weeks. I'm not exactly sure. And I have come up with this feeling that there's so much going on, and it's kind of paralyzed me in this ability to produce this episode. And so I've been feeling a lot of excited energy, but also a lot of nervousness and a lot of overwhelm. So let's start with the excited. I'm just so excited to be bringing this podcast to the airwaves for whoever is out there and is thinking, oh my God, how am I going to parent my teen? They're driving me nuts. I hope that you can gain something from this podcast and what I bring to all of my own coaching endeavors, is to allow some grace and strength in your own ability and how you can create and engage with your own child in a way that you never thought was possible. I'm nervous because, this is kind of nerve-wracking, putting yourself out there, right? I do have another podcast, but I've failed miserably at being consistent with it. And so I really want to be consistent with that. And I'm holding myself accountable to being able to present this information to all of you out there on a very consistent basis so that you can feel supported when you need it the most. Which, having that expectation of being consistent causes me to have a little bit of overwhelm. Like, am I going to be able to keep up with it? Is it going to take too much time away from everything? How am I going to feel if I don't get an episode out once a week and all of these things? So let's talk about that for a little bit. This feeling of overwhelm and the nervousness, it brings up a lot of fears for me. I am definitely a type A person. I definitely like to do things the absolute best way possible at all times. And sometimes I kind of fall back on just this fear that I have of failing at something. I have this deep-seated fear of failing. And we are going to dive into that later on in this podcast today, this fear of failure and how we can work through that process and bring that same sense of success to our children in allowing this process to happen naturally, this process of failure. Before we get into that, though, I want to tell you guys a little bit about me. You can imagine that because I am a teen life coach, a youth life coach, that I just am so enamored with teenagers. And I know that sounds weird to a lot of people. Turns out there are quite a few of us, which is really exciting for me, but teens are just my jam, right? So when I was 19, I was working in retail and I hated it. And I had tried some other things and nothing was really fitting with me and what I was looking to get out of life and a job and all of that stuff. And I had a friend that came to me and said, hey, you like kids, you should come work at this group home that I work at. And I was like, well, I don't really like kids, but teenagers, okay, maybe I'll give it a try. So I started working at a group home when I was 19, and I was working with kids ranging in ages from about 12, 13 up to 16, 17. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done, besides parenting my own children, of course. And I loved it. I loved being able to watch them grow in a way that not a lot of people thought was possible for them. being able to see those moments of clarity when they could look at their own behavior, address the thinking pattern that got them there, and then make that change. And it's a slow process, as I'm sure what all of you are aware that are listening that have your own kids. Change is a slow process, but it's possible. And if it's possible for these kids who, my gosh, they have some of the saddest stories I've ever read about, and had the joy of being a part of their recovery from their lives. And if they can do it, then we can all do it, right? And I think that's the thing I love the most about teenagers is they talk about teenagers having this fearlessness of life, and they take risks all the time. But it's that fearlessness and that risk taking that allows them to grow like no one's business, that allows them to overcome horrible, horrible things that have happened in their life and become this amazing, functioning, happy, joyful, normal, quote unquote, person. So when I started that journey when I was 19, I didn't really know if I wanted to go to college or what I wanted to do because I was 19, and who really knows what they want to do when they're 19. So when I turned, I was 21 years old when I decided to go back to school. I went to a local community college here where I live in Northern California, and I slowly earned my Associate of Science with honors in psychology. That process, that 2-year degree, took me 7 years. It took me 7 years to get my Associates of Science in psychology, mainly because I was working full time during that whole process. And so that made things very interesting and difficult, to say the least. When I was done there, I transferred to University of California, Davis, and I earned my Bachelor of Arts in psychology there as well. I had almost a minor. I call it a soft minor because I didn't complete one class to officially get my minor in sociology, which is also extremely fascinating for me. I love the study of people, the study of groups of people, the study of how people think and interact with each other is fascinating to me. During that time, I also trained as a peer counselor at the house at UC Davis, which sadly I don't even think exists anymore. And it had been an institution on campus since I think the campus even opened. And what that was, we were trained specifically to work with peers if someone wasn't comfortable going and seeking, counseling from any of the staff in the mental health department. And it taught me a lot about having empathy for others and holding space for people to process their own feelings and emotions without providing any of my own thoughts or interactions on them, but just allowing them the process to go through it on their own and reaching their own end, which, as we know, sticks more than if someone's like, oh yeah, this is what you should do. Advice is cheap and abundant. So I learned about not giving advice and holding space to find their own true inner answer, which is also what I bring as a coach, which is super, super fun to watch. During that time, I also was a research assistant in a lab, and that lab specifically was studying ADHD and schizophrenia, and I got to partake in a lot of really cool things. I learned how to put an EEG cap on, and I learned that I have an excellent skill at washing people's hair, which is totally random and fun, but, I like to share random fun things. So as you can imagine, during this 9-year process of going into school, I had an ultimate plan, right? So I learned that I loved doing research and learning, and I really, really wanted to do that full time. I really, really, really wanted to get my PhD in clinical psychology. but life had other plans. I applied to 5 schools. I did not get into any of those 5 schools. And I had to make a choice of, do I try again and do it all over, or do I just move on? And here I am. This is fast forward. It's 6 years later. I got my Bachelor of Arts at the age of 31. We're 6.5 years, almost 7 years past that graduation. And now I am married to my very best friend. I have 2 beautiful daughters, and I found my calling as a life coach for youth and their parents, right? So like, this was a process for me. And during this whole time, I had this end goal, what I thought meant success, and it wasn't. It wasn't success, because you don't know you've reached your end until you've reached your end. So ultimately, this whole process, the years and years and years that I've been working towards something has brought me here, talking to you, speaking to you through this podcast, Parenting the Gap. And the reason I'm doing this is because, as much as I love supporting teens, it's the people that are there every day that need the most support. You parents are you're in the trenches with your teenagers, right? You can hire me and I can work with your teenager and I can get them to think about their own thinking and their own processes. But unless the entire dynamic changes and you know how to support them in the same way, change is going to be slow. When you have a whole united front working with someone to support them in a way that encourages their own personal growth, then that happens much faster. Because again, teenagers have this lack of fear and this risk taking that if you support them in making these huge changes, then they will step up and they will do that, which is amazing and fun. And I love doing that. And so here I am trying to bring it to you guys, the parents, so that you can also be able to see where they're struggling and where their pain points are, and then come up with a way that is going to be supportive to them, that is both helpful and parental. So I know I've been talking a lot about this behavior that you see in adolescence, and it's different from everything that you've seen previously with your children, when you had them when they were newborns and then they became toddlers and then young children, and now it's like, my 12-year-old is talking back and rolling their eyes and having attitude, and where did this come from? This is something that I'm going to bring more information to you in a future podcast on, but teens they're in this transitional period that's really important to understand, right? And they're no longer defined by their parents or their family, but they're not quite full functioning adults who know who they are and what their goals and values are. And that simply comes down to they have a lack of experience in life. They still need guidance and all of that from their parents, but that guidance is going to look a little bit different. It's not going to be hand holding to make sure that they don't fall. It's going to be support when they do fall and helping them back up, right? So this time of adolescence is a time period where they learn about their own autonomy. They learn about peer pressure, social interactions, the good and the bad. They learn about boundaries with self and others, how to stay motivated, and ultimately it's about discovering who they are as a person. So now that we've gone through all of that, I think maybe there's been this underlying concept that I want to introduce to you guys today, and that is this fear of failure, right? I talked about that at the beginning. I have a fear of failing with this podcast because I've set some sort of expectation for myself of what it's going to look like, right? So I want to talk about that in this first podcast, this idea of failing, the fear of failure. So when you're talking about anything, it's a really good idea to set a clear definition. So here goes the definition, my definition of failure. So to start, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, failure is defined as an omission of occurrence or performance. So I'll say that again, an omission of occurrence or performance. So if you take that definition and you apply it to a person, there has to be some sort of expectation for something that is going to occur or some sort of performance that they're going to have, right? There has to be an expected outcome in order for there to be failure. And this is something that we see a lot, right? We have created environments for our children that will see them come short of an expectation. We set expectations on our children such as getting the best grades you possibly can. Well, what does that mean? And most people will say, well, you have to get an A or a high B, right? Not all kids can do that in every subject. So it's kind of like setting them up to fail when the expectation of their performance is to have this class, you're going to get an A in this class, you're going to get an A in this class, you're going to get an A in this class. Also, we're going to put you in soccer and you better be the best player on the team and go to church and sing in the choir and do all of these things, right? So there's this pressure that we put on our kids because we don't want them to fail, right? This omission of occurrence or performance. Here's my personal definition of failure. Failure is only achieved when you stop trying. I'm going to say that again. Failure is only achieved when you stop trying. When you think about individuals, when you think about babies, let's do this. I love this example, right? I always ask people when they're struggling with something. Okay, you have a kid, okay? What, or not what, but when does your child learn how to walk? And I say, oh, I don't know. I think they started trying to walk when they were, like 8, 9 months old, but they were trying to pull themselves up. And I was like, okay, that's when they started walking, but when did they start learning how to walk? They say, oh, I don't understand the difference. And I say, the very first time your baby tries to roll over is when they're trying to learn how to walk. And sometimes I get like, oh yeah. And then other times I get blank faces. Like, what do you mean? Walking is not just about moving your feet across the ground. It's also about having the muscle strength in order to raise your body up on 2 feet. It's also about having a sense of body awareness, knowing where all your limbs are at once. You have to have a core strength in order to do that. You need to be able to see where you're going and understand all of these random weird concepts. The first time your baby even reaches for something, that's part of their learning how to walk process. But we don't always think about it like that because we're very short term with babies, right? It's always like, oh, this milestone and this milestone and this milestone and this milestone. And we keep track of them and we watch and we monitor and we make sure everything is happening just the way it should. And then they get a little older and they start doing things by themselves and we don't have such closely monitored milestones for them. So it's harder for us to say, oh yeah, they're still doing well. They're still succeeding. So let's look at an adolescent whose main purpose is learning how to interact with their world. This is the time, research has shown, that their mind expands to a greater world, something outside of them, outside of their core family. And peer relationships shift from just being there's peers around me and we play to there's peers around me. Who do I want to interact with? What kind of social gain do I get from interacting with certain people and not interacting with other people? This is a milestone and we forget, mostly because we're not really taught about this. We're taught, oh, teenagers are hormonal, which is true. They are. There's hormones involved. in what is going on with teens during this time. But it's this expansion of the mind that you start seeing, especially in today, the anxiety, the overwhelm, the depression, the alcohol use, the drug use, tobacco use, because they don't know how to compensate for all of the pressure that they're feeling on them. If you look at kids who are doing exceptionally well in all areas of their life, if you go backwards, you'll see that they were shown how to be autonomous very early on. And being autonomous means you know how to make your own decisions. You feel confident about making your own decisions about things. This is a big thing, the feeling of confidence to make your own decisions. They were allowed to make mistakes, right? You see those kids who are like perfectly dressed and their outfits are awesome and the hair is perfect and they just look like they walked out of a photo shoot. And then you see the other kids who have 2 different pairs of shoes on, 4 socks, some are rolled, some are folded, these crazy patterned shorts that completely clash whatever they're wearing on top of their body. And it is also completely inappropriate to the type of environment that you're having. And you might think, well, that kid's got issues. That kid was allowed to go to their own drawer, pick out their own clothes of what looked fun and cool to them, put it on their own body. And then if it is inappropriate to the weather, they learned that because they went outside and they're like, oh, it's cold. This doesn't feel good. And the next time they learn. So what does any of this have to do with this fear of failure, right? Well, the kid whose clothing was orchestrated for them knows that that is the expectation. And when they try to do that themselves, if they can't quite get it right the first time, because it's been done all the time for them, they should be able to do it, right? That's their expectation for themselves. And they won't be able to do that. And therefore, by definition of Merriam-Webster, they have omitted performance. They did not perform the same way that their parents did. So therefore, they have failed. This is an important concept right here, right? We as parents forget that we were once adolescents and our thought processes now are not the same as they were when we were 12, 13, 14. And we learn best from being in an uncomfortable situation. And that's also something that we forget. So this idea of fear of failure and what failure really is can be expanded. Where if your only definition of failure is that you stop trying, then the expectation is that you are going to struggle. If you have the expectation of struggle, then that is success when you struggle. And the struggle will get less and less and less, and you can update your own expectation of that moment until you succeed. And then you haven't failed at all, anywhere along the process. We don't look at a kid who's learning how to walk and see them fall and say, oh, you failed. Such a bummer. You better try harder next time. We say, yeah, you did it. Try again. It's taking that energy and bringing it to teenagers. How cool would that be? Totally sidetracked, but how cool would that be if we had our kid come home and say, I just had the worst math test of my life. I failed. I'm never going to get an A in that class. It's absolutely impossible. I'm never doing this again. And instead of saying, oh, okay, well, yeah, we don't want you to get an F in the class, and we did want you to get an A, and it's unfortunate that you can't get an A anymore. And you're setting your kid up for like, you have a specific performance that we need from you. Instead of that, what if we said, oh my God, you took a test today? Yes. That is so great. I hear that you struggled with it, but next time you'll learn, right? What are the questions that you missed? What can we learn from them? What if we could all do that with ourselves? God, what would it feel like to start a new job? And instead of going into the job like, okay, I'm going to do everything right today. I'm not going to make any mistakes. What if you went into the job going, oh my gosh, I'm going to learn so much today. I'm going to make so many mistakes, but I'm going to do it with grace. And I'm going to show them that I am just up for this task and up for this challenge by just continuing to try, continuing to learn, continuing to push forward. Gosh, that sounds amazing. So I'm going to leave you guys with some thoughts about failure. I am going to struggle at getting out regular podcast episodes, but I will keep trying to get better. And I therefore will not fail at providing this podcast to you, the parents. And I invite you to look at something in your own daily life that you struggle with. Change the expectation. Change the definition of success and failure. And just try it out. See what that feels like. See how that changes your own mindset on how to move forward. And if you're feeling really ambitious, try it with your kids. It doesn't matter how old they are. Try and be that cheerleader for them. Show them where they can grow rather than pointing out to them where they lack. It's a very simple change, but it's very difficult. Simple, but not easy. Thank you for being here with me today, listening to me rant and rave. It's kind of what I do the best. I want you guys all to know that I'm here to give support and to serve. If there's something that you want me to talk about, shoot me an email. If there's something that you need specific help on, shoot me an email. I am always willing to talk to anybody who is needing some support in a way that I can give to them. So parents, let's all go out today. Take a breath and change the expectations so that we can always be successful. Until next time.